Welcome to San Mateo County Today. Conversations with government leaders throughout San Mateo County. Here's your host, Marshall Wilson.
Welcome to San Mateo County Today. I'm your host, Marshall Wilson. Today, coming up, we have Vice Mayor Sam Hindy of the City of Foster City. He's going to talk about council priorities and also a big levee project. And then we hear from John Mays, the editor of the San Mateo Daily Journal. We'll talk a little bit about Donald Trump and a little bit about fake news and how to distinguish what's fake from what's real. Thanks for joining us. Welcome back. I'm here with Vice Mayor Sam Hindy of Foster City. Welcome to San Mateo County Today.
Pleasure to be with you. Thank you for having me.
So each year in Foster City, the council sets a series of priorities for the year. Let's talk about those priorities and some of those benchmarks along the way. So what are the priorities for Foster City this year?
You are correct, Marshall. So every year, at the beginning of the year, the City Council meets on their strategic annual meeting. And that's when we take the time to set the priorities for the City Council for the upcoming year. And this year we had 6 priorities, really. We had the land use, we had traffic, circulation, and transportation. We also have infrastructure and economic development. Education was one of the priorities, as well as communication and community engagement. Those were our priorities for this year.
Well, and let's talk about community engagement. First off, I went to your website to prep for this. You're doing a series of videos on it now. It looks like it's just much more engaging than it was. Why is that a priority for Foster City?
We want to, we truly believe, the council believes that we have a great community. What biggest asset, in my opinion, for Foster City are the families that we have. We have highly educated, diverse community. We want to reach out to that segment of our population and have them give us a feedback and make sure they are always informed of what's going on in the city and what the council and the city are doing. So we've taken on that. We created a new position, actually. We created a communication director position, and we launched a campaign on social media as well as on our website. And like you mentioned, also we are doing a series of documentary videos that talks about the history of Foster City, where it was, what it is today, and where we're going in the future. And actually last week, we had the first meeting of community engagement dialogue series, and where we bring in the community in to come in to the meeting. We tell them what we're doing, and most importantly, really, we want to hear from them what is important to them. And like I said, because they are highly educated and talented people, want to hear from them suggested solution to where we could move forward.
Well, I know, and you talked about some of your priorities are economic development and land use. I imagine you heard from the constituents about that. Are you hearing a lot about how, just as we've heard from cities all over the peninsula, that there's just a lot more traffic and a lot more people, and how are you managing that? I guess that gets back down to land use and economic development.
Right. So as you know, we are dealing with the same issues that most communities in the peninsula and the Bay Area are dealing, mostly housing and transportation and mobility. So in Foster City, we are fortunate to be in the location we are. We are in the center, what we call the Silicon Valley. We are in between San Francisco and San Jose, and then easy commute, not easy commute, but short distance to the East Bay. However, with that comes the traffic congestion.
Right.
So we are fortunate in Foster City. We do not have the congestion per se generated from the city. However, we are dealing with the byproduct of this robust economy, and you could see the 92-101 junction. It's getting to a point to where any time of the day you're having congestion at that ramp and junction. So we are trying to do what we can on a local level that we could help, and we are coordinating with the regional, the county. We're talking with Assembly Member Kevin Mullen also to try to find a solution for the 101-92 junction, which we believe is really a major problem. I know a lot of work is being done on the 101. However, in my humble opinion, until the 101-92 junction is taken care of, you're still going to have that bottleneck effect, and you could really see it on the 101, whether north, south, and the 92 east and west. So that has to be taken care of. And I think we have indication that this is being in the works now. They're looking at it more seriously, so we are excited about that. But what's important for us is what we could do on a local level. So that is where we are doing our effort. So we last last November, we have launched a program called Scoop. Scoop is a carpooling matching company that matches commuters that go into work and coming from work. They match them together. You book with them the night before. And the council felt that we need to provide not only to our business community, but also to our residents a way to leave that single occupancy vehicle. So not only did we launch Scoop, we subsidized the program with $60,000 to where the rider could only pay $2 to go to work or come from work. And we did this, again, in the spirit of San Mateo County in collaboration with San Mateo, with the city of San Mateo. So when we started thinking about the program, we reached out to San Mateo and we told them, would you like to partner with us? And they did. And it really has been a very successful program. Scoop has done, we had, up to date, we had 26,000 trips, and we have 2,500 users that registered on Scoop, and we saved 350,000 tons of CO2. So very excited about the program. And it was such a success that the council authorized another $10,000 to extend the subsidy for it. Also on the traffic, what we're doing is we're working with our employers. Mm-hmm. So what we do is we have, our employers have shuttle programs, personal shuttle programs that move their employees as well, along with what we work with commute.org, which takes shuttling employees for that last mile to Caltrain or even to Melbrace BART station. So these are the things we're doing, along with improving the circulation on our streets, like left lanes and that kind of stuff that Public Works works on.
Well, it sounds like what you're trying to do is, these are really regional issues that have gone on, traffic, commuting. So you're trying to take it on those regional issues, but solve them on a local level. I think another one for Foster City, I know they've put a lot of work into the levee project.
Correct.
Again, sea level rise is more than a regional problem, it's a global problem, but you're trying to take action locally. Can you tell us what you're doing on the levee project?
Sure. So this levee project started with FEMA requiring, they remapped their flood zones, and they classified us for we're not safe in FEMA's mapping for the 100-year storm, and they required us to raise our levee to meet that requirement. So we did this, I believe, started in 2015, and the effort started with Congresswoman Spears and Assemblymember Mullen and Senator Hill. They brought in all these, we have, I think, over 18 regulatory agencies. So we kicked off the meeting to make sure that they are all in sync and on board, so the requirement does not change.
So there are 18 regulatory agencies.
That is correct.
Local, state, federal?
Yes,
yeah, okay.
that we have to satisfy. So with that effort, FEMA has agreed that to put us in a seclusion zone and not classify us as a flood zone, as long as we are showing advancing that project forward. So when the council looked at raising the levees to meet the FEMA standard, we also considering the sea level rise. As a public entity, you don't build just for today. Right. You always build for the future. But the question came to us, so how far in the future you want to raise your levies? Because not only would it cost you financially, but also aesthetically. The higher you raise it, obviously, the more you're changing the aesthetic of the Bay Trail around Foster mm-hmm. City. So the council at this point feels like probably raising the levy to meet FEMA standard, as well as accounting for sea level rise for the year 2050. We thought that would be a safe and prudent way to move forward. Also, we're building the levees in a hybrid manner to where if the need arises for future generation that need to raise the levee more, we're building the foundation so they could just top it off. It will not have to start from the beginning.
And where's the funding going to come from? I imagine that's a big key to this. Where are you looking at funding sources?
Right, so this is really where, because it's basically taxpayers' money. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, the residents and the businesses and the parcel owners are the one who are going to end up paying for this. So it's going to, most likely, we are going to general obligation bond to where the money will be, assessed to each parcel. So everybody will pay their share.
when do you think when we might see that actually on the ballot?
So I think this will be on the November ballot if everything moves as we anticipate. We'll probably submit this to the county in July, and it'll be on the ballot for November. Again, the importance of moving this project forward in a timely manner is very important because the consequences for Foster City are extreme. So if you own a home that has a loan that's federally guaranteed, you will have to purchase flood insurance, which comes at least $1,500. That what they tell us the numbers are $1,500 to $2,000 a year. Compared to levy assessment on general obligation, you're probably looking at $400 per $1 million assessment on the properties.
Right. So you can either pay a lot in insurance or a lot less to actually build the levee and strengthen it.
Absolutely. And then the other hidden thing is, even if you don't have a federally guaranteed loan, the property value, if you are designated as a flood zone, will go much lower for everybody in the city, and that is not something prudent. And I think the community in general, it seems like the indication now they understand this, and this takes us back to the engagement and dialogue that we're having with our community, with the stakeholders, making sure they are on board, making sure they understand the project, they understand why we're doing this project, and the consequences or the alternative of doing nothing. So that's where we're at today.
We only have about a minute or so left. I wanted to talk a little bit about you. So you've been on the council now for about 2 years, is that correct?
That is correct. This is my second year.
And you've lived in Foster City since 1992.
That is correct.
Why did you want to become involved in dealing with all these issues and let's face it, give up a lot of your nights to community meetings and a lot of studies? And I understand just after this interview, you're heading up to Sacramento for a political conference.
That is correct.
But why did you want to get involved in local politics and local issues?
Well, I liked getting involved in the community, so I started getting involved in the community in non-politics. But really, to go back to your specific question, we had an economic development strategic plan that was approved in Foster City in 2013. And as a business owner and as a resident, I was looking forward for the plan to be implemented. And unfortunately, it was not. It was tabled by the previous council, and that's really the main reason that got me motivated to get involved, because I saw something is wrong, and I could either complain about it or get involved and try to make a difference. And that's really the main reason I did, and now I'm serving on the Economic Development Subcommittee. We have great programs working on, I mentioned the Scoop. We also have Kiva Small Business Loans, Kiva Foster City, which is a crowdfunding loan for the small business owners. So the city moving forward with its economic development strategic plan, and that's really why I like to get involved. And at the end of the day, we are such a great community, Foster City, and giving back to your community. And yes, it does take a lot of time, personal time, but it's also very rewarding.
I think that's a message for anybody in their community. If you don't like the direction it's necessarily going, get involved.
Absolutely. You know, you have two choices. You can continue to complain and do nothing about it, with nothing going to change, or be an agent of change, positive change, hopefully.
All right. Hey, well, thank you for joining us on San Mateo County today, and we'll be right back with an interview with John Mays, the editor of the San Mateo Daily Journal.
Thank you for
Thanks for joining us. Welcome back to San Mateo County Today. I'm your host, Marshall Wilson. I'm now joined by John Mays, the editor-in-chief of the San Mateo Daily Journal. John, thanks for joining us.
Sure thing.
And the Daily Journal is now celebrating its 17th year as the local newspaper in San Mateo County. What started the Daily Journal 17 years ago, and what keeps you going today?
Well, we started 17 years ago because of the lack of local news coverage. So at the time, it was San Mateo County Times, and they had just gotten bought out by Alameda Newspaper Group. Right. So a lot of the news was East Bay oriented. So I didn't actually start the paper. I came 2 months after. I worked for the Independent before, the San Mateo Independent, which was a twice weekly paper. And so the founders of the paper, which included Jerry Lee, the publisher, thought that it would be a good idea to start an intensely local newspaper. And so we've just sort of been riding that train since. And focusing on local news. We have national, international, state news from the Associated Press, but really our bread and butter is the local news, and I think that's something that you can't really get elsewhere. So that's sort of how we do it.
And you are very much, I think what's kind of fun about the Daily Journal is the personal perspective that you actually bring to the Daily Journal. Like you wrote a column in today's newspaper about your history in newspapers, which I didn't know that your grandfather and grandmother ran a paper in Lodi.
Yeah, I thought I'd reveal that today. Yeah, I mean, you know, my grandmother was a newspaper editor, and at the time that she started, it was in the 50s, right? So, you know, women didn't really have a prominent role in newspapers at that time. And so she was the editor of the women's page. So, you know, social events, teas, that kind of thing. And then it just was one of those things that after a period of time, you know, if someone's doing the job, they just start doing the job. So she became managing editor of the Lodi Sentinel after a number of years. And so, you know, she took time out after four kids, so she would come back and forth. And then they started a newspaper called the Lodi Life and Times. I think it was in the 70s. And yeah, it was in the 70s, and then it actually went out of business. So I learned from that not only do you have to have good news, but you also have to sell advertising, because that's important. But you know,
because people actually want to be paid, right?
They do, yeah. So there was a recession at the time, and anyway, and so she ended up working for a different newspapers. You know the story, right? How you end up working at different newspapers. So, you know, I like to tell the story that I first thought about being a writer because I thought typing was cool, because my grandmother used to write on a manual typewriter. She's really fast, and she slammed the carriage and smoked Marlboro Reds, and there's smoke going, and I thought, wow, this is really exciting. You know, typing is exciting, right? So I figured, you know, I want to type for a living, which I figure is better than smoking for a living. So, but you know,
because typically smoking for a living doesn't it's not a long career.
I don't think there's money in it. But
Yeah.
I mean, journalism has not much more, right? So, yeah, so I guess just from spending time with her during the summers in the Central Valley, you know, I learned a lot of different things, right? Like how to grow tomatoes, right? How to communicate with people, how to tell stories, how to listen to people, how to interact with the community, and it kind of resonated with me, and so I carry that to this day. And so, you know, I wrote the column today. It was about migration, right? And it was about how my family came from Arkansas during the Dust Bowl era, and so sort of using that as an example of what's happening today with migration, and not just migration from Mexico, but from all over the world, all over the country to this area, and sort of its impact here, and how people sort of accept and assimilate and that type of thing. So, yeah.
Well, and that's an example of one aspect you do is take those national stories. A national story is about immigration, and you localize it to a very personal level.
Right.
How do you go about, now that in the era of Trump, it's a global story, but it's actually also a very local story,
right?
Because of economic development, H-1B visas, for instance, migration, walls, all this. How do you go about taking that national story and making it on a local level that really resonates? Like, oh, that actually affects me here in San Mateo County.
Well, I mean, there's a reaction, right? So when Trump was elected, there was a reaction, and one of the things that I wrote a column about it, saying that, you know, those who are Trump supporters shouldn't be as hopeful as they are. Those who are not for Trump or oppose Trump shouldn't be as worried as they are, because of our pendulum, right? Our political pendulum, in that there's checks and balances in the system. And I think we've seen that sort of in action in the last 17 days, 15 days, something like that. I don't know, whatever it is. Where, you know, you can't just go in and just, you know, rule the roost. You know,
just drain the swamp.
Yeah, right. There's a lot of challenges to that. So, you know, here when Trump was elected, there was a lot of people. Some people were very happy. A lot of people were freaking out, right? So how do we sort of how do we write about that, right? So it kind of got organized into City Council and the County Board of Supervisors' reaction to it when it came to immigration, right? So there was some discussion about sanctuary counties, sanctuary cities, welcoming cities, statements of civil rights, right? So, you know, some of that is political, some of that is to ease the minds of those who are concerned by the impact of the Trump administration. Some of it's just sort of like, you know, some people just didn't know what else to do, right? So we sort of wrote about all the different efforts at the government level to address community concerns, right? And it ran the gamut from just sort of nothing, right? Nothing at all, not even talking about it, to a welcoming statement, right? We welcome everyone, right? Which is sort of neutral way of doing it. I thought the most robust and interesting discussions were with the City of San Mateo and the County Board of Supervisors, in which they were actually discussing the sanctuary policy and sort of what is the county's current policy when it comes to interacting with federal officials, right? And I think that bringing that up and discussing it and having everyone know what the policy is and how the policy has changed over the years, how the policy interacts with current law, federal law, how the policy interacts with current federal policy, and how that policy is changing from one extreme to the other, or not, we don't know yet, was, I think, a pretty useful exercise. So we covered that extensively and sort of was able to bring out different voices saying pro and con, you know, what is the impact and what is the current policy in this county?
As part of that, also, your role is explaining what is the current policy, because most people wouldn't know what the policy is, and digging into that.
Right, and I think, you know, the primary policy that we look at is sort of the sheriff's office with the jail and how the jail interacts with federal officials, right, with ICE. And
that's such a confusing process for most people to begin with, and that you have a local law enforcement, your local police agency, dealing with the sheriff's office, which runs the jails, then dealing with the federal government, and just explaining that whole process is kind of complicated.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes, you know, people don't know that, you know, Belmont doesn't have its own jail, right? That's that. But also, the sheriff's office sort of interacts with the federal officials and communicates with them. Just when someone who has an immigration detain order or is wanted by federal officials for whatever reason, when they are released, they notify or will notify the federal officials, right? That's public information. So if you and I wanted to know when people were getting released, we could. So to not disclose that to the federal officials would be not disclosing public information, which is, for any other agency or any other person, would be inherently wrong. So you have to, right? So that's the policy in place. And there could be, I mean, other cities have done it, San Francisco, where they refuse to, and there's been some problems with that. And so the county was sort of thinking that they didn't want to go along those lines because there was a threat of federal funding. And then, you know, in the city of San Mateo, the discussion started talking about, you know, human trafficking task force, drug enforcement task force, gang task force, and how they work with federal officials to solve crime problems. And so to jeopardize that would be a concern, right? So it's brought to the council level, and the council says, okay, well, good, we know all this, and we can make a decision on what if the policy is good for us and what we can do moving forward into the future.
Now, to keep going down the Trump thread here, he's accused the news media of basically focusing on what he calls fake news. When you hear him talk about fake news, as a lifelong newsman, what do you immediately think of? What does that conjure up to you?
I don't know. I mean, he's not the only one that says fake news, right? And so it's this term that's come out, fake news, right?
I disagree with it. It must be fake news.
Right. Well, that's sort of what
I saw it. Yeah.
That's what it's become. Like, I don't agree with the story, or there's errors in the story, right? To me, and I could be wrong, this is my interpretation of it, is that fake news is when you go online and there's a story that's not real. It's not a real story, right? So, like, if you go to Facebook and you see Colin Kaepernick, you know, is facing lifetime ban from the NFL, right? So you go, okay, well, that's a fake news story. So it's not real, right? Or the story about Hillary Clinton's, that was a child sex ring in a pizza parlor, right?
Yeah.
That was fake news, right? It was just made up, right? And that's sort of, you know, it was this whole thing about like clickbait and BuzzFeed and just trying to get people to do stuff. You know, they had those lists like, you wouldn't believe, you know, what she wore to prom, you know, that kind of thing. And then it developed into this fake news where you go, oh my, I have to click on it, right? And every time you click, they make money, right? So that to me is fake news, but sort of developed into this, you know, what is, you know, portraying inaccurate or unflattering or unfair news coverage. And I don't know if that's very productive or not. It's funny though, because we do hear it locally. People say, fake news, you know, and what do you mean by that? Do we have fake news? I mean, is there something that's not real in our paper? And people can disagree. They can have additional comments about our stories, but I mean, we do have real news in our paper. So I don't know. I don't know where this is going to go with fake news, but I wouldn't mind if the term was retired relatively soon.
Well, so for our non-fake news, we go to the Daily Journal.
Thank you very much.
All right, John, thanks for joining us on San Mateo County today. And thank you for joining us, and please join us again.
Thank you very much.